The morning started like any other on the Catherian homeworld. Ambassador Cleth was reviewing trade agreements in his office when the first explosions shook the capital. Through his window, he watched in horror as massive alien ships descended from the sky like angry metal gods. The Vorthok had arrived without warning. Their dark ships blocked out the sun as plasma cannons carved burning scars across the city. Buildings that had stood for centuries crumbled to ash in seconds. The elegant spires of Catherian architecture melted like candles under the relentless bombardment. Cleeth's security team rushed him to the emergency bunker deep beneath the government complex. The reinforced walls shook with each impact above. Emergency reports flooded in from across their territory. The news grew worse by the hour. The industrial colony of Zarian Prime had surrendered after just 6 hours of fighting. The agricultural world of Talith had gone silent completely. The mining stations in the Outer Rim were burning wrecks, drifting in space. "How many ships do they have?" Cleth asked his military advisor, General Vex. "Our scouts counted over 300 capital ships in the main fleet alone. They have smaller attack groups hitting our other colonies simultaneously. We estimate they brought over 2,000 vessels total." The numbers were staggering. The entire Catherian defense fleet numbered fewer than 80 ships, and most of those were lightly armed patrol vessels designed to stop pirates, not fight. A full-scale war. Through the bunker's communication system, they heard the desperate final transmissions from their outer colonies. Brave Catherian pilots threw their small fighters against the massive Vorthok dreadnoughts like insects attacking a bonfire. The results were predictably tragic. "The Vorthok commander is demanding our immediate surrender," the communications officer reported. "He says resistance will only make our enslavement more painful." Cleth knew the stories. The Vorthok Dominion didn't just conquer worlds, they broke entire civilizations. They turned conquered populations into slave laborers, working them to death in their industrial complexes. Those too weak to work were simply eliminated. It was systematic, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. "Send out the distress call," Cleth ordered. "Broadcast it on every frequency we have." The message went out across the galaxy, translated into dozens of languages. The Catherian Collective, known for their peaceful trading and advanced medical technology, was begging for help. They offered everything they had, their vast wealth accumulated over centuries of successful commerce, their advanced scientific knowledge, even their homeworld itself. Days passed with no response. The great galactic powers, who had once competed for Catherian trade partnerships, now remained silent. The Altarian Empire, with their massive fleets, said nothing. The Centauran Federation, who had defensive pacts with dozens of species, stayed quiet. Even the peaceful Andorian Union, who shared similar values with the Catherians, offered only words of sympathy. Everyone knew the truth. The Vorthok Dominion was too powerful, too ruthless. Challenging them meant risking total war, and no civilization was willing to take that risk for a species they saw as useful, but ultimately expendable. Then, 3 weeks into their nightmare, a simple message arrived. It came from a species most galactic civilizations barely acknowledged: humans, from a small cluster of worlds on the very edge of known space. These humans were newcomers to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only recently. Most established civilizations considered them primitive barbarians who solved everything through violence. But they were the only ones who answered the call for help. In their desperation, the Catherians didn't care about humanity's reputation for brutality. They just needed someone, anyone, willing to stand against the Vorthok war machine. The refugee station orbiting the Catherian moon was a depressing sight. What had once been a luxury resort for wealthy traders was now packed with terrified families huddled in makeshift shelters. The elegant dining halls had been converted into medical wards filled with wounded survivors. Children who should have been playing in the station's gardens instead sat quietly beside their parents. their large compound eyes reflecting trauma no young being should experience. Commander Jake Mitchell walked through the crowded corridors, with just 4 other humans behind him. The Catharians had expected to see dropships full of human soldiers, massive carriers bristling with weapons, or at least some sign that Earth was taking their situation seriously. Instead, they got 5 humans in simple gray uniforms carrying nothing but data tablets and communication devices. Ambassador Cleth rushed to meet them at the docking port, his translator device crackling with nervous energy. The ambassador was an impressive figure by Catharian standards, nearly 8 feet tall, with iridescent chitin that had once marked him as nobility. Now, stress had dulled his natural coloring to a sickly brown. Commander Mitchell, we are grateful beyond words that humanity has answered our call, Cleth began, his translator converting his chittering speech into standard galactic common. When will your main fleet arrive? Our intelligence suggests the Vorthok are planning to execute prisoners if they detect a large military buildup. Jake looked around the refugee camp with calculating eyes. He watched Catharian mothers trying to comfort their children, elderly beings who had lost everything they had worked for across centuries of life, and wounded soldiers who had fought bravely against impossible odds. Ambassador, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jake said calmly. We're not here to rescue anyone. The translator must have malfunctioned, Cleth thought. The human's words made no sense. I'm sorry, Commander, but perhaps something was lost in translation. We called for military assistance. Our people are dying in Vorthok labor camps. I heard you correctly, Jake replied. He pulled out his datapad and activated a holographic display. We're here to solve your Vorthok problem permanently. But to do that, we need detailed intelligence. Ship positions, command hierarchies, supply lines, the location of every single Vorthok installation in this sector. Dr. Elena Boskis, Jake's intelligence specialist, stepped forward. She had spent the journey from Earth studying everything they knew about Vorthok military doctrine. We need to know their communication protocols, their shift rotations, their security weaknesses, everything. But Commander, Cleth's voice rose with desperation, while you're gathering intelligence, thousands of my people are suffering. The Vorthok worked them 18 hours a day in toxic mining operations. They're dying. Jake's expression didn't change. Ambassador, let me explain something about humans. We don't do rescue missions where we save some people and leave the threat intact. That just means the same thing happens again in a few years to someone else. He gestured to the holographic display, showing the locations of known Vorthok fleet positions. When humans solve a problem, we solve it completely. We don't just free your people. We make sure the Vorthok can never threaten anyone else ever again. Lieutenant Troy Anderson, the team's military analyst, added quietly, Sir, we've identified the command structure. The Vorthok operate on a strict hierarchy. Remove the right individuals in the right order, and their entire military coordination collapses. The certainty in their voices was unsettling. These humans weren't discussing a rescue operation, or even a conventional military campaign. They were talking about something else entirely, something that sounded more like extermination than liberation. You're talking about genocide, Cleth whispered, the translation barely audible. Jake met his gaze directly. We're talking about solving problems. The Vorthok Dominion has been enslaving species for 3 centuries. How many civilizations have to suffer before someone stops them permanently? Around them, other Catharian officials had gathered to listen. They exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing they might have invited something far more dangerous than their captors into their territory. Captain Lisa Rodriguez sat in the cramped computer lab aboard the human intelligence ship, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards simultaneously. Her team of cyber warfare specialists had been working around the clock for 6 days straight, living on coffee and determination. The Vorthok had no idea that their most secure military networks were already compromised. Got another one? announced Sergeant Kevin Park from his station. "I'm inside their orbital defense grid around the third moon. They're using the same encryption protocols as their main fleet." Lisa smiled grimly. The Vorthok had made a critical mistake. They had built their entire military computer system using the same base code. Once her team cracked one network, they could access them all. It was like having a master key to every lock in the Dominion. "Upload the virus package to their targeting computers," Lisa ordered. "Make it look like random system errors. I want their weapons to start missing targets by just a few degrees. Enough to notice something's wrong, but not enough to figure out why." On her main screen, she watched as Vorthok ships across 3 star systems began experiencing technical difficulties. Their advanced plasma cannons, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, started firing wide of their marks. Frustrated, Vorthok engineers would spend hours trying to fix problems that existed only in corrupted software. Meanwhile, 2 systems away, Lieutenant Tom Hayes crouched in the ventilation shaft of a Vorthok command center. His team had been moving through the facility for 3 hours, invisible to every sensor and guard. They had studied Vorthok architecture for months, learning every weakness in their supposedly impregnable installations. "Target acquired," whispered Corporal Diana Chen through the comm system. She had eyes on Commander Vex, the Vorthok officer, responsible for coordinating attacks on civilian populations. "Clean shot available." "Negative," Tom replied softly. "We do this quiet. Make it look like an accident." The humans had learned that the Vorthok had one major weakness. They trusted their technology completely. Their commanders walked around their own ships without personal security, believing their shields and sensors made them untouchable. They never imagined enemies who could turn that same technology against them. Tom activated a small device that interfaced with the station's environmental systems. Within minutes, Commander Dex would suffer what appeared to be a tragic accident with a malfunctioning air recycling unit. The Vorthok would blame poor maintenance, never suspecting assassination. 300 miles above the planet, Admiral Mike Foster watched the operations unfold from his command center. His ship looked like a simple cargo hauler from the outside. Rusted hull, outdated engines, the kind of vessel that transported grain and manufactured goods between worlds. The Vorthok had scanned it dozens of times and classified it as harmless. They had no idea it was actually the most advanced stealth warship in the human fleet, equipped with weapons that could punch through capital ship armor and sensors that could track objects across entire star systems. "Sir, another Vorthok supply convoy is approaching the jump point," reported Navigation Officer Brian Torres. 12 transport ships with minimal escort. "Intercept course," Mike ordered. "Prepare the electromagnetic pulse weapons." The beauty of the human approach was its simplicity. They didn't announce their presence with massive fleet battles that would alert the entire Dominion. Instead, supply convoys simply vanished without a trace. Communication relays stopped working. Key personnel died in apparent accidents. The Vorthok military machine began to starve and go blind without understanding why. Within a week, Vorthok commanders were reporting ghost attacks across dozens of systems. Their supply lines had become unreliable. Their communication networks suffered constant failures. Officers who had served the Dominion faithfully for decades were dying in mysterious accidents. The most terrifying part was the complete absence of enemy contact. Vorthok sensors detected no human ships, no invasion fleets, no signs of conventional warfare. Their enemies had become invisible phantoms, who struck without warning and vanished without trace. For a military force built around overwhelming firepower and brutal intimidation, fighting an enemy they couldn't see or engage directly was a nightmare beyond their comprehension. Warlord Thane stood in his command chamber, aboard the massive dreadnought Dominator, staring at reports that made no sense. For 3 weeks, his mighty Dominion had been falling apart piece by piece. Supply convoys disappeared without sending. distress signals. Communication networks failed at critical moments. His best commanders were dying in what appeared to be accidents, but far too many accidents to be coincidence. The invisible enemy was driving him to madness. His sensors detected nothing. His scouts found no enemy fleets. Yet somehow, these humans were systematically dismantling everything he had built over decades of conquest. Warlord, his intelligence officer approached nervously. We've lost contact with the mining operations in the Kepler system. The entire facility has gone dark. That's the 7th installation this week, Thane growled, his scaled fist crushing the metal armrest of his command chair. Where are they? How are they doing this? His senior advisor, General Korax, stepped forward. Sir, perhaps it's time to consider that these humans fight differently than any enemy we've faced. They don't want territory or resources. They seem to want our complete destruction. Thane's eyes blazed with fury. The Vorthok Dominion had conquered 47 worlds over the past century. They had enslaved entire civilizations and crushed any resistance with overwhelming force. No enemy had ever posed a serious threat to their power. Bring me the Catharian prisoners from the labor camps, Thane ordered. All of them. Transport them to our capital ships, where the humans can see them. Within hours, transport ships began, moving thousands of Catharian slaves from mining facilities and work camps to the main Vorthok fleet. The aliens were herded into cargo holds, weak and terrified after months of brutal captivity. Many were sick from exposure to toxic chemicals in the mines. Others bore the scars of Vorthok discipline devices. Thane activated the galaxy-wide communication system that the Dominion used to broadcast their conquests. His message went out on every frequency, reaching every civilized world in known space. Humans. His voice boomed across the stars. Your cowardly attacks end now. We have 50,000 Catharian prisoners aboard our ships. Continue your sabotage, and we will execute them all. You have 1 day to surrender, or watch the species you claim. To protect die slowly. The transmission cut to live feeds from the prisoner holds, showing thousands of terrified Catharians crowded together in metal cages. Thane smiled with satisfaction. No species would risk genocide to protect aliens they had barely met. The human response came faster than anyone expected. General Robert Kane appeared on every screen in the galaxy just 4 hours later. He sat calmly behind a simple desk, wearing a standard military uniform without decoration. His voice was steady, almost conversational, but carried a weight that made entire star systems fall silent. The Vorthok Dominion has made a critical error in judgment, Kane began. You have threatened innocents under human protection. This is unacceptable. He paused, looking directly into the camera, with eyes that seemed to see through space itself. You have 12 hours to begin releasing all prisoners and evacuating your military forces from Catharian territory. Failure to comply will result in the complete extinction of your species. Across the galaxy, world leaders and military commanders stared at their screens in shock. The human wasn't angry or emotional. He spoke like someone discussing the weather, making a simple statement of fact. Thane laughed when he saw the recording. 12 hours? With what army? They have no fleet. No invasion force. It's an empty threat. But his advisors were not so confident. These humans had already proven they could strike anywhere without being detected. They had turned the Dominion's own technology against them. If they could make such specific threats, perhaps they had. Weapons beyond Vorthok, understanding. As the deadline approached, Thane remained defiant. At exactly 12 hours and 1 minute after Kane's ultimatum, he gave the order to execute the first group of Catharian prisoners. The executions were broadcast live across the galaxy, a show of Vorthok power designed to prove that no one could challenge their authority. 23 minutes later, the Vorthok colony world of Nexus Prime simply ceased to exist. The second Vorthok world died 3 days after the first. Then the third. Each time, General Kane appeared on galactic broadcasts, with the same calm expression, reading casualty reports like weather updates. Billions of Vorthok civilians simply vanished in nuclear fire. Their worlds turned into radioactive wastelands that would remain uninhabitable for centuries. The galaxy watched in stunned silence, as humanity demonstrated a level of ruthlessness that defied comprehension. Other species had fought wars for territory, resources, or political power. Humans fought to completely eliminate threats, treating genocide as just another military tactic. By the end of the first week, the Vorthok Dominion was in complete chaos. Their leadership structure had collapsed as panic spread through their ranks. Military commanders abandoned their posts rather than face the invisible death that had claimed so many of their colleagues. Entire fleets surrendered without firing a shot, their crews terrified of being marked for extinction. Warlord Thane made his final transmission from his flagship, now hiding in a remote nebula, far from any inhabited system. His once proud voice had been reduced to desperate pleading. "We surrender," he broadcast on all frequencies. "The Vorthok Dominion hereby releases all prisoners and agrees to any terms the humans demand. Please, no more worlds. We surrender completely." The response came from President Helen Carter, speaking from the steps of the Earth Government Building. Behind her, the blue and green planet that had spawned humanity's expansion across the stars looked deceptively peaceful. "Surrender accepted," she said simply. "All Catherian prisoners will be released immediately. Full reparations will be paid from Vorthok assets. Your military will be disbanded, and your colonies will be placed under galactic oversight. Any violation of these terms will result in the completion of your species' extinction." Liberation happened faster than anyone thought possible. Human transport ships appeared at every Vorthok facility simultaneously, as if they had been waiting in position for weeks. The rescued Catherians were pale and weak from their captivity, but alive. Medical teams worked around the clock to treat injuries and malnutrition from months in brutal labor camps. Ambassador Cleth stood in his rebuilt office on the Catherian homeworld, watching reconstruction crews repair the damage from the initial Vorthok assault. Human engineering teams worked alongside Catherian workers, their efficiency impressive even by galactic standards. The humans had not only freed his people, but were helping restore their civilization. "Sir," his aide approached nervously, "President Carter has requested your presence at the Galactic Assembly. She's announcing something called the Terran Protection Compact." The great assembly hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of species gathered to hear what the humans would do next. President Carter took the podium with the same calm confidence that had characterized every human communication during the crisis. "The events of recent weeks have demonstrated a fundamental problem with galactic security," she began. "Aggressive species continue to threaten peaceful civilizations because the cost of intervention is too high for most governments." She gestured to the Catherian delegation in the audience. The Catherian collective called for help, and only humanity answered. "This cannot be allowed to happen again. Therefore, Earth announces the formation of the Terran Protection Compact. Any species may request human protection against aggressive neighbors. Our response will be swift, decisive, and permanent." The president paused, looking directly into the cameras broadcasting her speech across the galaxy. "Understand what you're asking for. We protect our friends with the same absolute commitment we use to destroy our enemies. There are no half measures in human warfare." After the session, Cleth watched as delegates from dozens of species quietly approached human representatives. The Altarian Empire, which had ignored Catherian pleas for help, now sought assurances that humans wouldn't view their past inaction as hostile. The Centauran Federation offered military cooperation treaties. Even powerful species like the Andromedans requested diplomatic meetings, but other reactions were equally telling. Military delegations from several major powers immediately departed for their home worlds, undoubtedly to begin emergency defense preparations. The humans had demonstrated that overwhelming firepower and advanced technology meant nothing against enemies who fought without rules or limitations. As Cleth returned to his quarters that evening, he reflected on what his people had gained and lost. They were free, their worlds restored, their futures secure under human protection. But they had also learned a terrifying truth about their rescuers. Humans didn't distinguish between protecting innocents and destroying threats. They saw them as the same action. In their minds, ensuring the safety of those under their protection required the complete elimination of anyone who might pose a future risk. The galaxy now had a new apex predator, one that treated mercy and ruthlessness as identical concepts.